So this will come as a surprise to literally nobody, but Nintendo is already working on a Nintendo Switch 2 OLED model. This is all coming to us from a report from ZDNet Korea. But the only information we really have about the actual device is about the screen. It'll come from Samsung Display, it'll be an OLED panel, it'll be 1080p resolution. But that's all we have. We don't know if it'll be bigger, we don't know if it'll have the same refresh rate, if it'll have HDR, if it'll be variable refresh rate. We don't have any of that information. That said, if it's going to be an OLED panel, I would be very surprised if there wasn't, at the very least, HDR, because HDR would have the best chance to shine via an OLED panel where you can have those deep, inky blacks and high contrast. But I'm also expecting those other things. It would be really weird to downgrade from 120 Hz down to 60 Hz, and it would be weird to not have variable refresh rate. The Nintendo Switch 1 OLED model certainly set a precedent for the screen size. I think we're all expecting the screen size to be larger. The Switch 2 has a fairly noticeable bezel on the screen, and I imagine that the OLED, like the Switch 1 OLED, will fill out that bezel. That might seem like a small increase in the grand scheme, but it's really nice to have that whole screen filled out. It makes the device feel more premium, if that makes sense. The overall build quality of the Switch 1 OLED was also better than the Switch 1, but we don't have much more to improve upon as far as the Switch 2 goes, in my opinion, so I'm not really expecting many improvements there, though they might also come. Though personally speaking, I think I'm more interested in two other upgrades that an OLED model could make, and those being the battery life and the storage capacity. The Switch 1 OLED increased the battery life by a pretty significant amount from that Switch 1 model, specifically the launch model, and I found myself using the console in handheld mode a lot more after that because it lived long enough for me to play a game. I'm really having that problem with the Switch 2 currently, where I very rarely play it outside of a situation where I, have access to power or, being docked in general. So that would definitely be an attractive reason to go with a Switch 2 model, if these reports are to be believed. The current Switch 2 model also has 256 gigs of storage. I wouldn't be surprised if a Switch 2 OLED increased that up to 500, though personally I'd love to see it go up to a terabyte because those game file sizes have increased a lot from Switch 1 over to Switch 2. But given the current economic situation and the hardware crises, I'm not so sure that we could expect that, not without the price being astronomical. And that's the next thing I really wanted to mention. How do you even price this thing? The original Nintendo Switch was $300. The Switch 1 OLED increased that price $50 up to $350, but I have a hard time seeing that being the case with this console. The console's already increasing from $450 to $500 in September because of the economic and hardware situations. I would not be surprised to see a Switch 2 OLED hit $600 minimum, and I don't know that I would be willing to pay that much. I mean, if you look at the Steam Deck, it just went up $300, and I highly doubt Nintendo would be that aggressive with its pricing model. But if this thing's going to exist under the circumstances that we live in, $600 seems like at the bare minimum where we'll end up. I think the only way that I see myself making that upgrade is if I trade in my current Switch 2 model and knock some of the price off, but that's still a steep ask for a console that I already own. Regardless of that, though, it sounds like the device won't even release until 2028. Mass production isn't scheduled to start until the turn from 2027 to 2028, so mid-2028, maybe late 2028 is when this happens, and who knows where we'll be from an economic standpoint by then. It could be a lot worse than it is now, it could be better, we don't know. And I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on regarding a Switch 2 OLED model is the dock. The Switch 1 OLED released with a redesign of the dock that added a removable backplate as well as an Ethernet port. But those are things we already have access to on the Switch 2 dock, so I don't know if there's necessarily a need to redesign it. They could redesign it. I think there's an opportunity there, and if they want the Switch 2 OLED to stand out from the original model, you might as well make it a little bit different. As far as actual advancements that come with that, maybe they add some more cooling. There's a fan in the current Switch 2 dock, as you might know. And then we could get into the fairy tale land of extra horsepower on a Switch 2 dock. I don't think that will happen, but it's a conversation we've been having since the Switch 1 was not even revealed yet. We've seen other hardware outside of like the console space do this before, and I think it would be a neat opportunity for Nintendo to experiment with that with a Switch 2, but I don't think that's going to happen. And again, if we're going back to the price, I think Nintendo wants to keep things conservative while they can and not blow up this console before it has a chance to thrive. And then I guess that also begs the question of a Nintendo Switch 2 Lite. I'm a little surprised that we didn't hear about that before this report of a Switch 2 OLED. I feel like the Lite was a success for Nintendo. It was a cheaper option for families, and I think cheaper options are what they're going to want in this current economic situation. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this something you even want to consider right now? Have you bought a Switch 2? Would this be the reason you buy a Switch 2? Or is the looming threat of a higher price just a deal breaker from the get-go? Let us know. But for more on Nintendo Switch 2 and everything else, keep subscribed to GVG. We have a lot more on the way. But until then, keep the games good and the vibes greater. Bye now.